Good morning, good afternoon, Faith Talk Revolution family. Good to see everybody. And welcome to all of those who are new to the Race Talk Revolution show this week. All righty. So here we go. Again, welcome to Race Talk Revolution with Lane and Eugene. Race Talk Revolution is a platform where your voice matters. February is Black History Month, and we are pleased to kick off this month and kick off our lineup with archaeologist, educator, and cultural historian, Dr. Cheryl LaRoche, who will speak with us about the lessons and value of African American history. As always, during our conversation today, we ask that you please remain muted. When we get to the Q&A section, we will instruct you on how to raise your hands at that time. Now, because the conversations are so rich and our guest speakers come with so much knowledge, we encourage everyone to limit your use of the chat during their presentations. We want everybody to stay focused on what's being said. Now, I know that could be a little challenging because stuff comes up and you want to comment about it, but we're asking you to keep from doing that as much as possible. And we want to please have you use the opportunity available during the Q&A to activate your camera and to express your questions and comments at that time. We also want to remind you that here at Race Talk Revolution, this is a loving, inclusive platform designed to strip away the false beliefs that keep us separated as human beings, to uncover the not so hidden truth that we all truly do want the same things in life, and to heal the wounds created by systemic racism. Race Talk Revolution is a safe and brave space for people of all backgrounds to share ideas and opinions and explore the nuances of systemic racism while together we grow our capacity for effective anti-racist activism. The Race Talk Revolution community is committed to practicing radically inclusive love. What do we mean by that? That means that we may not understand everything that's being said. We may not understand or agree with what's being shared. However, we are committed to listening with respect, appreciation, and empathy. You see, it is our commitment here at Race Talk Revolution that every person be encouraged and heard and appreciated. Because here on Race Talk Revolution with Lane and Eugene, every voice matters. And now here's my co-host, Reverend Lane Cobb.
Hey, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm sorry I don't have my fancy background up. I got a new laptop. Yay. So that's what happens when you switch your hardware. And I am so pleased to have Dr. Cheryl Jennifer LaRoche with us today. I have known you for many years, and I don't know that I've ever told you how impressed I am and how much I admire your work. So let me just introduce you quickly, and then I'll turn the reins over to you. Cheryl Jennifer LaRoche uses a transdisciplinary approach to uncover the buried truths of African American history. She began her career as an archaeological conservator on the African burial ground in New York City and has studied the Underground Railroad and escape from slavery for more than 20 years. From archaeology to the law, from mapping to material cultural analysis, these are the tools she applies in her work across institutions, museums, and historical organizations. She has been the principal investigator for numerous National Park Service projects, including the Hampton National Historic Site in Towson, Maryland, the Civil Rights Initiative, and the President's House ethnographic study in Philadelphia. She participated in the Harriet Tubman, a Woman of Courage and Vision program for the National Archives to celebrate the opening of the Harriet Tubman Underground Railroad Visitor Center in Cambridge, Maryland. Dr. LaRoche participated in the Tubman National Monument Scholars Roundtable and served as the lead author and cultural landscape consultant for the Harriet Tubman Special Resource Study, Environmental Assessment for the National Park Service. Dr. LaRoche served as the project historian for the Cultural Expressions exhibition for the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture. Society for Historical Archaeology awarded Dr. LaRoche the John L. Carter Award for her exemplary work in bringing a multidisciplinary approach to the study of African-American archaeology. She has written numerous articles. Her first book is Free Black Communities and the Underground Railroad, The Geography of Resistance. And boy, am I glad to have you here, Dr. LaRoche. And I'm glad to be through that bio. Boy, that was excellent. I don't know why I had such a hard time reading it, but boy, you are accomplished, and we are so grateful to have you here. Thank you so much for coming.
You know, Lane, thank you. Thank you, Eugene. Thank you, everyone, for coming. And after all of that, and after she said all of the things that I've worked on, I'm not going to talk about any of those. I know that as a specialist on the Underground Railroad, people might be interested in that, but I spent the last 4 years working with the National Park Service, and I wrote a almost 500-page report on Reconstruction. And I have decided that the parallels that I see from the work in Reconstruction and what's going on in the world today, that's what I want to talk about. So I'm going to share my screen. Maybe I can't, maybe you didn't make me co-host.
You're muted, Lane.
Thank you. I did, and something has happened. Eugene, can you do that for me, please? For some reason, I'm not able to see any of the participants.
So what are you asking me to do?
Make Dr. LaRoche co-host, please. I did it, and in going
she is.
Okay, Dr. LaRoche, you are co-host.
There we go. All right, I got it.
See? It wasn't me.
Takes a village.
Thank God. What? Good thing we have one handy.
There. Are we ready? Okay.
Looks good.
So I am looking at Reconstruction. I moved the dates. I started in 1861. This is going to be a history lesson, you know, Reconstruction 101. And I moved it out to 1906, 1861, because that's when people began escaping slavery and coming into the contraband camps in Washington and other areas, in 1906, because that is really not the end of what the government says Reconstruction is, but what African Americans, how their lived experience sort of intersects with Reconstruction. This is a time period of great hope. Reconstruction starts when people are coming out of slavery. 4 million people are emancipated during this time period. And normally when we think about Reconstruction, it starts at the Emancipation Proclamation, and it moves to 1877 when there was this great betrayal and all of the sort of violence starts to occur in the South. But the Park Service asked me to look at Reconstruction in the National Capital Region around Washington, D.C., not the Deep South. What was happening in other parts of the country? The way history is usually told, you go from this high point in history at the Emancipation Proclamation, we jump over all of what happened in Reconstruction, and we end at the Harlem Renaissance, and that's where we take off at a high cultural moment. And all of the things that happened in between are left not so well analyzed or discussed. So we know that we have, during the Civil War, we have these Black soldiers who are coming home from the war, who are empowered by what has happened to them. We know that they are intersecting with the free Black communities that they are also encountering. And we know that all of these people are coalescing around the powers that they are accruing with freedom. We also know that from a political point of view, you start to have representatives in Congress. You have more people we have not only congressmen, we have also senators. There are dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of people who are serving the government at this time, at the national level and at the state and local level. But what did we learn? I don't know about you, you're probably younger than I am. I learned about carpetbaggers and I learned about these ineffectual people who were stealing elections and who didn't know what they were doing. Everything that I learned about Reconstruction was negative. And yet I know that the great strides that people were making in this time period, where they're moving from literally plantations to the Senate. Many of these people are the sons of the slaveholders. Many of these people who are coming into government are people who are well-educated, who are really seeking to begin to empower themselves politically. We know that Hiram Revels is sworn in right into the Congress, and we know that these are people who are taking the notion of freedom, political freedom, economic freedom, religious freedom, all the aspects of freedom that you can think of, and putting them into practice. We know that voting, which is begins now as the major expression of political will, begins in this time period where the government, not necessarily in the Deep South now, I'm talking about Washington, Northern Virginia, Maryland, this part of the country that is still in slavery through either the beginning of the Civil War, or for Maryland is in slavery through the end of the Civil War. So we know that voting, that these are the kinds of things that people are interested in achieving. So that what I see when I start to look at Reconstruction from the point of view of attainment, I see voting, I see political aspiration and achievement. I see people buying land and settling in all these different areas, no matter where you are in the country. In the years after the Civil War, African Americans are coming together. This is Alexandria, and all of these places that you see highlighted are small Black enclaves that were in Alexandria at the time. You see Haiti or Haiti, which is one of the most places, if it hasn't been erased from the maps, have a Haiti or Haiti as one of the regions of their town or municipality where Blacks lived. Sometimes it's Little Africa, sometimes it's New Guinea, but these kinds of places are indicative of the quest for land, are indicative for the quest for autonomy. All of these things come forward during this time period. We know, for example, that there's something called the Colored Conventions, and Black people before the end of slavery were coming together in these conventions to express their political will, even though they could not vote. They came together to influence. They came together to speak with one political voice. We see women and men. We see that even before the end of slavery, African Americans are taking on the mantle of freedom. They are preparing themselves for freedom. And one of the hallmarks of that freedom is the vote. But there's also another piece to this freedom. We know that many schools across the country, this is Tolson's Chapel in Northern Maryland, we know that these churches are doubling as schools. And they're doubling as schools and Sunday schools. So when you hear Sabbath school or Sunday school, one of the things that's going on even before slavery ended. So I'm moving back and forth because some things are a continuum. And the Sabbath school was one of the first vehicles of education for African Americans in this country. The way people got away with doing that was because they told the slaveholder that they wanted to learn to read the Bible. Now, this is deeply important because many of the states of the South had something called anti-literacy laws. And I want you to think deeply about this as I move through this. The municipalities, the states legislated literacy for Blacks. Why would they do that? I'm asking you the question, and I want to see your answer in the chat. What we know is that the Sabbath school lets people learn to read and write. There are multiple forms of literacy. You can read, but you can't write. You can know your letters. You can say a few, sort of single syllable words. That's one. You can read full sentences. You can write, and you know your numbers. Now, reading is one thing. When you read, you take in information. But when you write, you disseminate information. And nothing to the slaveholder is more dangerous than a literate person who is enslaved. And so we see African-American women at the helm. These Sabbath schools and schools for Blacks are actually the forerunner to the public school system in this country. So we know that education is just a monumental quest, and it is one of the hallmarks of attainment through Reconstruction. It's happening before. I'm not trying to give you this notion that there's a hard line. This quest for education is always with us. It is always part of the most important aspects of what freedom means and what we can show, how we can demonstrate that we are worthy of citizenship, that we are worthy of freedom. But if you think about laws and literacy, and I tell my students this all the time, laws only regulate what's possible. So people are not illiterate because they cannot read. They have the capacity to do this, and the laws are acknowledging the capacity. So what these laws are actually telling you is about Black capacity, that if we don't regulate Black capacity, they will read. If we don't regulate Black capacity, they will do these jobs that we don't want them to do. If we don't regulate Black capacity, they're going to be performing in ways that are going to compete with us for jobs. They're going to be performing in ways where they are thinking outside of the box around their enslavement. So we see that these schools, which every place that I studied for the last 4 years, this school, this land, this community, building this kind of infrastructure was what was first and foremost on their minds. For Black women, people like Mary Church Cheryl, they are also organizing beyond the church. They're forming the National Association of Colored Women's Clubs. They're coming together in federations. The women are also achieving their own power in organizing and coalescing around the issues that are important to women of color, which are different from the issues that are important to women, important for men. So we see the women are worried about their own personal safety. They're worried about their employment. They're worried about their children, their families. And so women are also coming together in this time period. Again, not to imply that they didn't organize before, but with freedom, they organize in a whole different way and at a whole different level. As part of the education, we start to see schools coming up, universities. They too start before the Civil War. We know that the AME Church, which is one of the things or one of the institutions that I study, starts the church schools very early on. This is Storied College up at Harper's Ferry, where John Brown is famous for the raid on Harper's Ferry. But this is one of the institutions of higher learning, because if you can understand that if literacy is being curtailed and regulated and forbidden, then just attaining an elementary or basic education was a feat. And to go beyond that basic education into college and advanced training was something that was sorely needed. We know up at Harper's Ferry, these are the students, just to show you that education is always, always, always at the forefront. And we know that these students are the ones that are, quote unquote, leading the race. The women have a motto: we lift as we climb. And we know that these are the people who are being educated, or being the school teachers who are being sent back out into the community to teach the others what they have learned. We know that places like Howard University, that begins in the period where these schools are being charted. And so these HBCUs have a long history of education. And if there is any question about why there's so much emphasis on education, I'm hoping to give you a bit of an understanding about why these things became so important. But what happens in Reconstruction, and if you all remember Plessy versus Ferguson, I don't know if you remember this, this was the separate but equal ruling. So we move through those years in Reconstruction where we actually see all of this attainment. We see these communities, we see these churches, we see all of this capacity building. And then we start to watch a new reality sink in. After 1877, the violence that descends on Blacks in the Deep South is mirrored by a multitude of laws that are passed around accommodations, around transportation. Have you heard this before? Around education. We know that the Constitution of Virginia starts to limit the capacity. We see voting rights being stripped away across the region after 1877, 1880. Plessy versus Ferguson is 1896. That is the moment where we say separate but equal, which will stay with this country for 60 years. And so I have watched this huge climb up to attainment, and then I have watched a withering and devastating descent that has been largely implied and imposed by legal mandates, by economic disempowerment, by violence and brutality, by a curtailment of education. And that period is one that we don't study and don't understand, and is often contested. And W.E.B. Du Bois studies it, and people for decades refuted everything he said around the powerful aspects of Reconstruction. So I'm not going to say too much more. This is a quilt, and I saw this and I thought, it says education is the most powerful weapon you can choose to change the world. And I think that people understand the power of education, and they understand just how much it empowers other people. I want to just read to you the report that I'm basing this on. I said it's about 400 pages. It's really detailed. It probably isn't something most of you would want to read, but you might be interested in the introduction and in the conclusion. So I'm going to read to you, and I hope I haven't been too, I'm trying to give you a thumbnail sketch of what this is so we can talk about it. But I wanted to read this part to you. Because we continue to seek legal solutions for social and racial problems, one lesson of Reconstruction is that we do not need more laws. What I learned from this is that when we say equal justice under the law, that under the law is there because you can't actually, according to white supremacy, be equal. So the best you can hope for, the best you can attain is equal justice under the law. That's as far as you're going to go. And we know that the laws don't work. Between 1861 and 2015, the country has passed no less than 49 laws that were supposed to guarantee some aspect of civil rights in this country, only to see them challenged, broken, ignored, or so narrowly interpreted as to be rendered ineffectual. The first civil rights legislation should have been the last, but what happens in this country is always a workaround. Then we have to have another law. Oh, we didn't think about transportation. We have a law for that. Oh, we didn't think about that. So that even though transportation, accommodation, some of these things are in the civil rights legislation of 1865, not 19, but 18, we know that the circumvention of the law is real. As a country, we have not confronted the consequences of centuries of slavery, followed by a civil war, Reconstruction, and Jim Crow segregation, leading to a modern, racialized disproportionality. Indeed, those challenges continue to haunt us as a nation as we move through the 21st century. A commitment to equal opportunity, to using the important lessons of Reconstruction, its withering failures, and its overlooked successes, to devise effective solutions to intractable problems would bolster a third Reconstruction. And so with that, because I don't want to spend too much time. I have a list of resources that I will send to Lane, and I want to stop sharing and really come in and you know, talk to you all and see what you think. If I went too quickly over something, because I know I was speeding through this, please feel free to ask for clarification.
Thank you so much for that. And I know that we have lots of crowd. We have people, people are celebrating. And thank you, because this is so relevant. People don't understand that history is just repeating and repeating and repeating. It's as if we have learned absolutely nothing. And yet people clearly have learned something, because the people who continue to make the restrictive laws know that it has worked. So they're learning something.
I've been so fascinated by how the legislation that's been coming up. I have been truly watching this cycle where we know that we want to, you know, ignorance is a real tool. And if we don't understand that, we're going to be doomed as a country, because we're watching a lot of perpetuation of ignorance as we look at our daily lives.
Absolutely. So
Yeah,
Eugene,
Jay.
we have a tremendous queue of folks, and perhaps we should just turn it over and begin Q&A.
Yes, yes, yes. Before I start calling on the hands that are up, just a real quick reminder on how to do that, to raise your hand. Take your cursor down to the reactions button at the lower right-hand side of your screen. And then click on reactions, and you will see the raise hand bar, the raise hand button. If it is not there, go to participants, click on participants, and the list of names will come up. Find your name in the 3 dots to the right of that, click on that, and you should find that ability to raise your hand at that place. All righty. So let's go ahead and get started. We have Onaje Muid, we have Vicky, and then Satori.
Thank you very much, Dr. LaRoche. Thank you so much for that presentation and the time that you had. A few questions come to mind, and that is, one, as we have now started to reconsider the word slave, and now people are speaking about enslaved persons who were captives, in fact, that language is starting to spread out to say, because they didn't define themselves as those things. And I'm bringing this up in the question around, to call this period Reconstruction seems to assume that there was something to be constructed from that. This is a reconstruction because construction happened in the first place. Is it? Do you think we need to consider a new phraseology of this period, because they were coming from slavery, so they wasn't being reconstructed? So that's one question. And the other thing is, and you might have said it and I might have missed it, I know you said you elongated the period, which is usually thought of Reconstruction, but what were the things that ended it, that that made it you know, such a hard climb back to the points that we had actually enjoyed before? Thank you.
So your question about the languages, Lincoln at one point says, you know, we're going to be coming out of the Civil War, we're going to reconstruct. And I think he's thinking of it around war and reconstructing the nation, bringing the nation back together. Many of these titles, names that were superimposed, should and could be changed. I mean, I just had this whole conversation. I work on the Underground Railroad. We're talking about that too. However, for now, it's a concept. And as the concept moves, maybe the name will move. But I think for now, because it is a bounded set of ideas, whether you agree with them or not, the name, we can do a dual thing, but we can't get rid of it. So we can say Reconstruction and something else. And then, you know, how culture changes after a while, you can drop the Reconstruction after the new name has been superimposed over it. I think that that's the best way to think about it. And tell me what your second question was.
Well, even more important than the second question, I'll go back to, I noticed that you didn't speak about Special Order 15. You didn't talk about Sherman's 40 acres.
Just, you know, right.
You
And
didn't talk about reparations, which was part of that movement. And even if we talk about Callie House in 1915, who created the ex-slave, something so on society. So the reparations movement has always been part of our people's history, and certainly we usually trace that back to Special Order 15 with Sherman.
absolutely. And what I wanted to do is exactly what's happening, is to open it up for discussion. Reparations is a part of this whole consideration. I'm trying to lay out what you're looking at and how we got there. Yes, Sherman's Order 15 and the whole notion of 40 acres and a mule, the whole notion of receiving land, but it didn't happen, not in this region. And so when I talk about this, these people had to buy their land, they had to earn their money. The quest is the same, but it didn't come from Sherman.
Mm-hmm.
Reparations is still on the table. My reparations first and foremost is no Black person should ever pay income taxes again. Just that's an easy one. And then from there we move forward. So that, yes, I didn't talk about the wealth that was amassed through slavery. I didn't talk about any of those things. All I'm trying to do is give a small platform to launch the conversation.
Thank you. We have Vicky, Satori, and then Tina.
Okay, well, I've been accused of having an extra set of nerves around social issues. So sometimes I'm not very articulate because it stirs up a lot of feelings for me. And I'm working with the NAACP, and Lane's talking me off the ledge sometimes on how do I self-regulate when I watch all this and there's this anger and at the injustice, and then try to figure out strategic actions. I mean, I just got elected to this local school committee, and we're just flooded with policies and rules and
parents
getting my hands slapped right and left. So how can I mean, you obviously have so much more experience with this than I do. How do you self-regulate, and what are some strategic actions? I'm in Western Mass, by the way.
Well, first of all, congratulations for being on the school board. And if anybody is looking for something else to do, you can get on the curriculum committee and you can get on the textbook committee. I'm just giving you your mandate, because if you want to engage in a war, you can just start with the textbooks. And so that's one place to begin to look. How do I self-regulate? Well, first of all, I am not naive about what this country is about. And because of that, I no longer expect. I have learned, let me put it like this, Vicki. I have learned that even justice is relative. That was a concept when I was young. Justice, truth, being another one, truth is up for grabs. I thought that there was such a thing as justice. And when you violated that it was against some real moral human code. And now what I see is my justice might not be the justice of the person next to me. My truth is not the truth of the person next to me. And so looking at all of the ways in which the noble truths have been subverted and not adhered to has actually helped me. And all I can do is fight for the justice that I know and fight for the causes that I understand. To fight for, so that when, Onaji speaks about reparations, to go back and fight from my space, from my contribution, from what I can do.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Very helpful.
Thank you, Vicki. Thank you, Dr. Cheryl.
Mm-hmm.
We have Satori, Tina, and then Sheila.
Yes, thank you very much for this forum. Thank you, Myrna, for your invitation. And thank you, Mrs. LaRoche, for your presentation. You said something that was very interesting to me that I'd like you to expand on, if you might. I think you, and if I'm misquoting you, please correct me. I think you said something to the effect of we didn't need any more laws to address social and racial issues. I found that very intriguing because it gave, to me, a glimpse at creating possibility and a hope and a moving forward without these laws. So could you speak more to that? And is that something you're saying, or is that something that historically was a
So when I started this, study 4 years ago, I knew about maybe the average person's understanding of Reconstruction. And I did not understand that there are all of these just civil rights laws. And let's not even go into all these other laws, but the Civil Rights Law of 1865 and the Civil Rights Law of 1875 and the Civil Rights, so there's all of these laws. And what I watch is that it gets ever more granular, and we just find a way. Oh, you said I can't use this. Well, I'll find another way to subvert that law. So until we begin to address what I said in this closing, until we begin to stop taking legal solutions for social and racial problems, we're not going to get anywhere. We know that this is traumatic, it's harmful. It needs to be a healing solution, that we have to look at people's internal understanding. We have to look at the mental makeup of the people that we're dealing with, that the law is like a hammer, and the people are not malleable. So until we can begin to address the subtext upon which this nation was founded, which is on the subtext of the inferiority and the suitability of people of color to be enslaved and then to be treated in minimal and marginal ways, we're not going to get anywhere. I mean, and the progress we have made has been done through legal means, but the Supreme Court, I mean, you want to look at Dred Scott, you want to look at Plessy, you want to look at the Fugitive Slave Law of 1850. We know that the Supreme Court and the legal apparatus in this country has been as much of a disincentive as it has been an incentive. We cannot rely on it alone.
Yes, I agree. And I am of the thinking, and I'm thinking that all of us are embedded with a program or a chip.
Yes.
And because in order to maintain this
construction, it takes all of us. So I assert that all of us are embedded with a chip that manages how we operate, how we relate in the world. And until we can dismantle that within ourselves, that's why laws don't apply, because we're still operating within our own little chips, and our chips are programmed to distance ourselves from each other, from our commonalities. And so as a Black woman, and of course we see what's happening with the Supreme Court nominee pick, as a Black woman, my chip tells me I'm not worthy. Mm-hmm. Well,
I don't believe that. I mean, I'm not worthy. I'm not as pretty, as smart as a white woman. Yeah. And when I dismantle that and push past that programming, I discover some kind of freedom out there, because when the programming has me stop and just behave according to that chip. But when I push past it, there's something called, there's nothing there except for me to be and act. And when I do that, I can have these real rich conversations, because you're being used, white people, just like I'm being used. Everybody's being used, and we're all in this conversation with our programs rather than each other. So that's, I definitely agree with you that these laws aren't going to make any difference, because the chip is just going to dismantle that law or subtract from the law, make a new one. And then
laws force people. The laws force. So, we are going to shove this down your throat. We're going to force you to do it. if indeed we can even enforce the law. So now you have people who are coerced and shoved and pushed and forced, but don't necessarily agree with what they're doing. So I would say I agree. And I think the depth, I don't think we take very superficial solutions for these intractable issues that are before us. And we never bring healing in as an aspect of how to handle it. So thank you.
Very well said. You have Tina, Sheila, and then Amy.
We actually have a 2-for-1 if that's okay.
I see, yes.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Eugene and Lane, and thank you, Dr. LaRoche. You know, it's just, your topic's been interesting because one thing that's really been bothering me the past couple of days, I think maybe particularly since we have a daughter in college, is this string of bomb threats at the HBCUs. And, you know, it's just very upsetting. And I guess it just fits right into the continuum of what you're talking about, right? About the desire to deny Black people education.
Well, it's more than that. So when you think about the bombings of the Black churches, which by the way, start a century before you know about it, they're bombing churches before the Civil War, they're burning down churches before the Civil War, they're burning down schools before the Civil War. So when we think about the mother root, when we think about the places that sustain one's being, one's psyche, these HBCUs are more than just schools. They are institutions where we generate our next generation of scholars and thinkers. When we think about these churches that are burned and bombed, they are the places where we come for spiritual sustenance so we can walk back out into the world. They're not, these bomb threats are highly calculated. They might not ever come to fruition, but the psyche and the psychological damage that that inflicts is at least achieving some level of destabilization. So when you think about Black people and Black capacity and the need for the government or whomever or the perpetrators of these bomb threats to keep Black people off balance, it is to keep us from competing. It is to keep us from excelling. It is to keep us from being able to turn our full attention to the things that matter most to us. So yes, I agree with you that these are very troubling times. And I would invite you to think even more deeply about why are these things happening now?
And I have a question, if that's okay. Your comments, like Satori's talked about laws just not really being the solution. I mean, I have focused my energies a lot on this whole Freedom to Vote Act, you know, working to try and, you know, get that. And obviously it didn't go anywhere. And so it's, my takeaway is like, as I think about where to put my energies next, maybe less about looking at what can be done at a legislative point and look at more of what can be done in terms of education.
Well, you know, voting is key. I watch people in the historical analysis die for the right. To the extent that you watch the level of denial, you understand the level of importance. And so you're watching now great effort being put into gerrymandering, great effort being put into the denial of the vote, no matter what else you want to call it. And it is because once we express ourselves in the vote and we put people in power that are going to perhaps do things in a different way, we know that the powers that the opposition, you know, I'm all over the place, just let me say this. When I talked about truth and justice being relative, one of the things I always also thought was that there was such a thing as fair play. That's gone too. And so all of the noble truths that we adhere to are gone? And how do we operate in a society, in an environment where we all are untethered and a little bit unmoored by what's going on in the world? But I watched abolitionists bring it into slavery. I watched all of these women attain the right to vote in the historical record. And in every one of those, it is on the ground, it is throwing your body at the problem, and it's not a cerebral undertaking. It's organizing, it is coming together as a collective, it's coalition building, all of those things that we know, but we have to go back to square one, because what we're up against is not what we've been taught to expect. Let me just put it like that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Before I go to Sheila, there's a question that Sarah LaRoche put in the chat. She says, I see the crowds of MAGA people waving flags, completely indoctrinated by racist thinking and having a huge influence on the elections, etc. How do we start to move the needle?
You know, I thought about this a lot. That's been a great PR machine, a lot of money behind it, and all of this acting up that you see in public just generates more income.
Yes.
So we are up against a huge amount of money. We're up against a PR machine that is working. And, you know, I don't want this to devolve into a political debate. Let me see how to say this. The cohesiveness that is necessary, the collective action that is necessary, is not necessarily available right now because we're not cohesive in our approach. You know, everybody got a different idea. And because you have a different idea and you don't agree, people, you know, they splinter and they scatter. But when you come together cohesively, collectively, with one voice and start to meet some of this, you know, when I always think about that term, and I'm sure you all thought about this, you know, great again. And I'm like, when exactly is again? Are you talking about when Black people were in slavery? Is that again? Or you're 1940, or what are you, 1955? Where's again?
Right.
So that let's just be clear. It's all code words for let's put white people back on top and unquestionably in power. Let's make sure that white men maintain control over all these other bodies. And let's make sure that capitalism is safe. I don't usually speak in these terms when I'm speaking, but I chose Reconstruction, and the work on Reconstruction has deeply radicalized me. Not that I wasn't already radical, but it's taken me to a whole different level. And what we're witnessing today, I know that your question doesn't have an answer per se, because we are up against a mighty machine with a lot of money. And to the extent where we can come together in unison as a collective and realistically understand what we're facing. Take off the blinders, stop being horrified, stop being depressed. This is the new reality. There is no justice. That's where I am.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Cheryl. And thank you, Sarah, for that. We have Sheila, we have Amy, then we have Joe. Judith, and you're after Joe.
Thank you. Now I just have to breathe from the last two.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sister Cheryl LaRoche, you took me to church. I'm jumping, shouting, crying, everything. And I want to be like you when I grow up. I just have to say that. I have often thought about this period of Reconstruction and have done some reading. And I just intuitively, I knew that somehow that what was happening then was exactly, you know, what was happening now, because what I've been most struck by and what I really want young African-American children to know, not about the picking cotton and broken down slave. But from the point of slavery being quote unquote over, and I've often had the scene in my mind of just standing there and, you know, oh, you're free. You have nothing, you know, after all this labor.
4 billion people.
Yes. I mean, this has been in my mind. And then in a few short years, 10 years, you know, senators, building schools. I'm like, that's who we are. The broken down slave, picking cotton, you know, no. I mean, and that is what caused the terrorism. That was the terror and the terrorism, like, oh, hell to the no.
That's right.
They doing all this in this short period of time, they're gonna come after us.
Yep.
They're gonna get powerful. And so we have to stop it. And so it is now. It's this terror, you could just feel it. It's fear. And like you said, now they have this big machine of money, and we can just feel so overwhelmed, you know, with the voter suppression that's happening now, the bomb threats and the police terrorism. It just, you know, but my question, and you have addressed it somewhat, is what is the healing? What can we do so that we don't, you know, feel so overwhelmed? What can we do as individuals to, you know, to go up against this? And I love how you said that, you know, justice is relative. I've never heard, you know, because we always think, oh, justice and democracy, and we hold on to the, you know, but I mean, they're like,
That's gone.
cursed. They're almost,
let it go.
You know, forget that, forget
Let it
justice.
go.
And, yeah, okay.
Let it go.
Okay.
You know, I speak in a lot of healing spaces, and although I'm often radicalized in those spaces and stir up a lot of what, you know, I kick up a lot of emotion when I speak. This is routinely the reaction that I get. But what I find is that afterwards, there's a catharsis. That yes, you might be uncomfortable, and yes, you might be angry, but there has been no space. The reason why people have this reaction when I talk is because there is no space to have the conversation. There is no space to feel the emotion. There is no permission to feel the emotion. And we cannot react. We have to react in ways that are productive. And so that, you know, this is my productive reaction. You know, this is how I get it out. Take care of yourself. I always say, you know, get a massage. And you have to pull your head up out of it. I dance. I take very good care of myself. And I do that in ways I pray, I'm spiritual. You know, church has always been the grace and the space. And when you listen to the music in church, it has been the place where the soul rests. And so even if you are not a churchgoer, there has to be some place where your soul can rest. Just think about that. And then I look at people who have to get back up in the morning in my studies. I watch people being separated, children being sold, people being whipped, burned, hung. I mean, I did a whole study on lynching. I just thought I didn't think I was going to make it through it. You can be traumatized by your own work, and I have to be careful not to be traumatized by my own work. When I was on the African burial ground, I studied someone who came into New York City in the 1700s with some waist beads, and I had to read the slavers' logs to see if people were being transported wearing these beads. I could only do it maybe 2 days at a time. If you really want to be disturbed, you read the slavers' logs about what they encounter when they go down into the hold of the slave ship. I've been there. I've read that stuff. And I mean, I was sick to my stomach. I would for 2 days, I couldn't I was so angry. So this work, if we're not careful, can make us crazy. And but it also makes us very powerful. And that is the thing, you know, what's that poem that said, when you buried us, no one told you that we were seeds? And so,
Right.
you know, that's kind of where I'm coming from with all of this.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. LaRoche. Thank you,
so
Sheila.
much, dear sister. Thank you.
We have Amy, Joe, and then Judith.
Hi, yeah. Well, thank you so much for this incredible presentation and discussion of Reconstruction. And you mentioned the Plessy case, and there has actually been a very optimistic development in the Plessy case. It doesn't undo all the incredible damage that caused by that Supreme Court decision. But I think a lot of people may not realize that that decision came about as a result of a group of very strong and dedicated African-American men in Louisiana who engineered a civil disobedience to try to overturn a segregation law in Louisiana that was passed in 1890. And so when Homer Plessy went into a train car for white passengers, it wasn't because he made a mistake and turned the wrong way on the train. He did that on purpose in order to be arrested, in order to bring what they hoped would be a case before the Supreme Court, and they truly believed the Supreme Court would rule in their favor. They were wrong. But on January 5th of this year, an amazing turnaround of this happened with Justice Harlan, who was the lone dissenter in that case, with his great-granddaughters were there. One of them was playing a cello suite as this ceremony started. And Governor of Louisiana, John Bel Edwards, signed a pardon for Homer Plessy, pardoning him for his conviction, which he had to go into court after the Plessy case was decided in 1896. He had to go into court in 1897 and pay his $25 fine. So I'm not sure he's going to get that $25. His family's going to get that $25 back. But the speeches, I really encourage you to watch. I put in the chat the video of the ceremony on January 5th. It really was inspiring. It was they found I wrote this book about the case, about these two relatives of the case, Keith Plessy and Phoebe Ferguson. Keith Plessy is his ancestor was Homer Plessy. Phoebe Ferguson, her ancestor was the judge who ruled against Homer Plessy in Louisiana courts. And they came together to form a foundation, and they discovered a friend of theirs told them this fall that there was a law in Louisiana that had been passed about 20 years earlier that people could get pardoned if they had been unjustly arrested for unjust civil rights laws. And so far, no one had taken them up on this, because most people who had been arrested saw that as a badge of honor to have been arrested in a civil rights protest. But
Amy, real fast. I just want to jump in.
Okay, well, I'm just saying,
on.
If you want to, it's a really amazing,
Amy,
amazing.
What I want to ask you is this:
of the Reconstruction period.
Wow.
So it relates to Reconstruction because Homer Plessy was arrested.
Amy,
yeah.
I just want to ask you: do you have a question for our guest? I mean, all
yes.
the information
is
that you're giving is great. Is there any way that you can
follow up on this? Because in his speech, the governor said, I am apologizing for this law. He's apologizing for what his state did. He's apologizing for, and is there any way to follow up on it and encourage other elected officials to follow the leadership of John Bel Edwards and the district attorney in New Orleans, who said he thought it was important that he should lead this effort to pardon him because it was his predecessor who made Homer Plessy come in and pay that fine.
I get what you're saying.
Okay, we got the question.
Let me just say this. There's been a lot of apologies for slavery. There've been a lot of apologies, and I like it that Homer Plessy has been exonerated and all of these things. It's a wonderful gesture. But okay, what did that do for me? What did it do for us? It's a nice, noble move, but until they do something actionable on the ground that is going to make an appreciable difference in the lives of people who are suffering under the injustices, then it's just a noble gesture. You know, and I go back to Onaje's question about reparations. If he wants to come back and do something substantive and start to look at reparations and really make some changes around the money that was lost for all the people who were enslaved and sold in Louisiana, then we can have a conversation. But, you know, so it's a nice gesture. It's a feel-good moment. And I'll say this, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a judge, and it has hampered me greatly. But we know that the law is on precedent, and we go back to all of these rulings, and some of these rulings are based on slavery, some of these rulings are based on all of these things that are problematic, but those are the foundations of our laws. And so we have a lot of work to do. I hear what you're saying, I appreciate what you're saying, I'll even look at what you're talking about. However, it doesn't move the needle. So thank you.
Thank you. We have Joe, Judith, and then Tyrone.
Thank you, Eugene. First of all, thank you, Dr. LaRoche, for sharing your presentation with the Race Talk community. It was outstanding. My question has to do with intentional ignorance. That phrase came up during your presentation, and it's always been of interest to me. I have what I think is a simple question. Do you have any advice on how to help others overcome intentional ignorance, or at least how to begin a dialogue about it?
So willful ignorance is a huge problem. I encounter it all the time. And for me, it takes a lot that you have to sort of work with the person and help them, not help them. How do I want to say this? I usually start at the point of departure, wherever the ignorance begins, and walk, you know, we walk together down that path to what I hope is going to be some kind of consensus. But you have to understand that willful ignorance is a very high-powered form of resistance. And so when you run into it, you know, when people can't hear, they can't understand a simple concept, they don't seem to be able to get it, or they didn't hear you. There's a lot of ways, and those of us who do a lot of this race work and training, we recognize them when they happen. So that willful ignorance is it's a suite of behaviors, and that's just one of them. When you encounter it, you begin to know that you're already meeting a level of resistance to the ideas, to the notions, to whatever it is that you are putting forward. And at that point, for me at least, and I'm sure other people would have very different responses to this, it then requires that you and the person come together at that point of resistance so that you can walk down this path towards some kind of consensus. It doesn't always happen. Some people will be enlightened when they start to realize that they're pushing back and can't hear you, but other people will escalate. The resistance gets stronger and stronger and stronger. So that's my answer. I don't know if that helps you, but at least recognize the behavior for what it is.
Thank you, Dr. Cheryl. Thank you, Joe. We have Judith and then my brother Tyrone.
Thank you, Dr. LaRoche, for this informative and consciousness-raising discussion that you have brought forth. You talked about a need to address the subtext upon which this country was founded with regards to race. I think that is probably, you know, like at the top of the list of most important issues to be addressed, because within that subtext is the ongoing 400 years attack on the potential of the African-American family And I think that's one of the reasons why there's so much resistance being raised to the possibility of an African-American female justice, because of the centuries and decades of attack on the Black family. The Black woman has been the main stabilizer. And so it is known what our power potential is with regards to holding the culture, holding the family, holding the community together. But my question is,
It's been at a great cost, by the way. Go ahead. I said it's been at a great cost.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Because we have been attacked from the holding cells in Africa throughout the Middle Passage and through the decades as well. But my concern is the ongoing relentless attack on African-American men. And that attack, began with the enslavement on the motherland, into the holding cells, the caves, holding them in the gallows, so to speak, of the ships, and keeping them as the primary target of abuse, oppression, psychological abuse, and a destabilization from the plantation to the current prison cells of today, through the media of distracting images of distracting our men from choosing women who look like them as mates in life, the underemployment and the unemployment of our men, the systematic channeling of them out of the education system by the 4th, 5th, and 6th grade, psychologically, and then physically at middle school and on. What can we do?
My God, is that the question? I will not even begin to struggle with that. But what I will say, and this is, I haven't read this, what I have observed is that it goes back to Black capacity. That Black men, that there is a fear factor at the accomplishments, at the excellence, at the ability, at the sort of the depth of awareness. I think Black men are among the most intuitive, insightful people on the planet.
Hear, hear.
The health of your society, you can judge the health of any society by the condition of their Black men. Mm. So when you begin to understand that my brothers, I love my brothers. And when you begin to understand that incarceration, the restriction of freedom, the limited spaces that are given, the restriction on the intellect, the clamping down of the whole being, not just the Black body, but the Black being, is designed to, again, as I said earlier, destabilize the family unit, destabilize, keep people off balance, to keep the collective from expressing their full potential, being, and excellence. Just as I said, you attack the churches and the schools to attack the root, it is true also with the Black men and women as the foundations of that root, as the tender of the root, as the cause and genesis, as the origins of the root. And so it all works together. It's all part of a larger, not just construction, it's an approach, it's a method, yeah, really. And it's devastating. It's psychologically, the same men that I think are as deeply intuitive and as, those canaries in the coal mine. I am watching their, the mental health, and because it is, we are less stoic now because we don't have to be as stoic. I'm seeing more mental health concerns now in my elder years than I ever saw among African Americans throughout my life, because we were all too busy sucking it up and staying alive.
Yeah.
So, I mean, thank you. You all, I'm gonna have to go downstairs and drink when this is over. Yes.
You and me both.
Yeah. Man. Judith, thank you so very much. And again, Dr. LaRoche, yes. Who we have, Brother Tyrone. Tyrone will be our last question for today. Well, the last person to ask the question, because I may have a couple and Lane may have. Go ahead, Tyrone.
Mr. Cheryl, have a drink for me too, please, when you go down there.
Okay.
Please. When my son was in 3rd grade, he first started learning about slavery in school. And he had nightmares for months. And his mother and I felt helpless. We wake up in the middle of the night and just sit with him. It brings up emotion for me now. But as painful as that was for him, I'm very grateful that he went through that. It helped to shape the great man that he is today. But I think today about how much we have become numb to so much of the horrors and the tragedies and the injustices that happen to Black people. I had a boss once that said he thinks that 90% of Black people are clinically depressed because of the stuff that's going on in this country. So I guess what I want to ask you a question about, how do we avoid the cynicism that often sets in, particularly for Black folks? To the degree that they say, vote, why the hell should I vote? Or why the hell should I do that? And I understand that.
I do too.
So cynicism is a poison as far as I'm concerned. And I wanted to get your take on it. What do you think? You have to have another drink first before
Yeah, I might have to. Hope is it's an interesting reaction to things. And I have been in all walks of life, from top kings and queens and down to being inside of drug spaces and dens. I've been everywhere. Been inside, not been in prison, but I've been inside of and lectured inside of jails. So this notion of cynicism and this clinical depression that you talk about is part of the design. Yes. So when you're resigned, you don't vote. When you're resigned, you don't react. I told you I did all those studies of lynchings. I do not look at the dangling Black body of horror in front of me when they want me to look at Michael Brown laying in the street all those hours. I don't look, I don't witness it. I shield myself from the images of horror that are designed to re-traumatize me. Yes. And designed to keep us cynical, to keep us ill. You have to understand that this is the construct and move away. And that to the extent that we are resigned and we do not participate, we are doing exactly what we have been not programmed, but traumatized into, to not deliver. And it's not even a hopeful message, because you can't say that to somebody. Oh man, you're playing right into the system. You know what? Here's the system and it is working. The system is working. That is my answer. And to overcome it, to transcend it, to heal from it, is something that this is what we're all trying to do. And what I would hope as we wrap wind this down, is that when we walk out of this race talk, we walk out a little stronger. We walk out with a little more understanding. We walk out with a little more self-assertion. We walk out with the ability the next time our neighbor says something really jacked up, not to confront them, but to walk with them down a path to consensus and enlightenment around race. Nothing else has worked. 400 years of trying this thing out and it hasn't worked. The people that are impaled on the pile of people who've tried to come at this problem come at this issue from a different way is tremendous. John Hope Franklin tried, Mary Frances Berry tried. It's time for a new approach.
Thank you very much. I apologize, Leah. Tyrone was our last question there. Yes, man. Good work, good everything. And all of the conversations that were going on in the chat, and then all the questions that have come up. Dr. LaRoche, thank you so very much. And as we typically do here on Race Talk Revolution, we ask our guest, what, Dr. LaRoche, in your opinion, from your perception, your purview, would be our or the call to action?
Well, I'm very wedded to the idea of healing as a call to action. I'm very wedded to the idea that we recognize the construct that we are in so that no one is deluded by what is around them. I think that the work that you're doing is a call to action, and the people who are with you are responding. And so when people say, I don't know what to do, I don't know what to do, what can I do? Like, wait a minute. That's willful ignorance. So don't ever say to me, I don't know what to do. It doesn't go down well with me. Because if you look around you at the monumental injustices, pick one, name them. Why are people shocked? Where have you been? Do you not read the newspaper? Do you not understand that this is the construction that is America? I can say, and let me be clear, I can say as many positive things as I've said problematic things. I love my country. My father was a decorated World War II veteran. I love my country. But it doesn't love me back. And so the call to action is to examine where you are, what you're doing, what you stand for, and begin to name the places and areas where you can be most effective. It's not some big thing where you have to go out and raise millions of dollars, although that might be nice, but we're up against a machine that's got more money than it looks like we'll ever be able to raise.
Come on.
So how are we going to look the situation in the eye and come up with creative solutions that work? And I'm not claiming that I have them. I'm just telling you that after 400 years, I can kind of tell you what doesn't work.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Lane? Hang on, Lane, just 1 second. Everybody take a breath.
Yeah. Because that's certainly what I had to do before I unmuted myself.
Yeah, that's why I said it. I saw you.
Thank you. Yeah, it is difficult to revisit and continue to re-witness and re-witness and re-witness and re-witness and re-witness. And it is a purpose, right? We need to do it. We are obligated to do it for the good of humanity, for the good of all of us. We have to examine this and own it and be courageous to at least, as you said, Dr. LaRoche, get in conversation about it, right? And that's the way to take care of each other as well. Allow someone, you talk, they talk, and then create a collective action so that you're not doing it alone, right? One of the things that I know in the Undoing Racism workshop, which I'm going to give some dates for in a minute, say, we don't want anybody out there alone.
Right.
Right? Because this is risky, this is painful. Got to take care of each other. I just want to say what an honor it is. And thank you for saying what you said about this program, about this collective, being an action and a call. And we absolutely honor every single spirit present. We are so grateful to you, Dr. LaRoche, today. I am grateful to you that I have had you as a friend and somewhat of a mentor. Thank you.
I think about, I don't know, many of you on this Zoom meeting, I'm sure that many of you are doing incredible work. Just this coalition right here. I mean, I only know two people here, Lane. I know you and I know Onaje. Just between the two of you, I know the incredible work. And I know the work that must be happening from the rest of you here. I'm listening to this, we're talking about Plessy versus Ferguson and all of these things. Can you imagine if just this group of people came together with their ideas and their expertise and applied it in ways that were effective and began to come together in a collective action? Wouldn't that be amazing?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and definitely we're working on it. We're working on it. So hang tight, Dr. LaRoche. I want to tell people I did put your website in the chat for folks who, if you want to follow Dr. LaRoche, please do look her up on the web.
If I update, I should tell you, I'm going to speak about Harriet Tubman for the Historical Society of the U.S. Capitol. I think it's next week. I'll send that to you, Lane. It's going to be a very different talk.
Okay, so that's something that we have access to? Like we can
yes, I'll send you the link when I get it.
Tremendous, wonderful. Okay, so as soon as I get all of those guys, I will send them in the email that is gonna come to you, and with the announcement of next week's show. But I'll have a special place where you can get all of these resources.
How do you get on the email? I'm sorry, Lane. How do you get on the email? I'm not on the email.
Who's that, Myrna?
Yes, hi.
You are, sweetheart, but just email me separately or put your new email in the chat right now, okay?
Okay,
All right.
thanks.
So folks,
Myrna, I know 3 people on the call.
Yep, and Denise Alston is on the call. So you know some folks on
Denise.
here.
Yeah.
All right, guys. So we're going to have to wrap this up, but I want to thank you and I want to encourage you and invite you to please join us next week. We are going to discuss the topic of restorative justice and its application as an alternative to traditional punitive criminal justice practices and the way in which restorative justice addresses racial trauma and the harm that it has done to communities of color in the name of law and order. I wanted to say that some of the questions in the chat today really point to the importance of continuing our education. And when you're talking about wanting to have a common language with which to discuss and dismantle systemic racism, you want to do an Undoing Racism workshop or a workshop that uses the same analysis of racism. We have some coming up in February and March. Equity Consulting Network has a Rethinking Racism workshop coming up next weekend, February 12th and 13th, and again on March 15th and 16th. I'm going to put all of these links in the chat for you. Center for Safety and Change has a Getting to the Root workshop on February 24th and 25th, and again on March 24th and 25th. Our next workshop on creating safe spaces to grow beyond racism is scheduled for March 19th. The investment for that one is just $50. So if you're interested in that, please email us at info@racetalkrevolution.com. I'm going to put those resources in the chat for you, and I'm going to turn it over to Eugene, who's going to tell you
about this book study. So we're doing a lot of things, you know, Race Talk Revolution, because of your support and because of your love and your continuing to show up for us and with us, that we, you know, are branching out and doing more things. So it is not too late to join our weekly book study that starts tomorrow evening from 7 to 8 p.m. Eastern time. We will be meeting for 6 weeks, and the book is The Sum of Us: What Racism Cost All of Us and How We Can Prosper Together. And that's by Heather McGee.
Last words, Dr. LaRoche?
You know, no, just thank you for the work that you do. And thank you for all of the ways in which you are organizing. Thank you for continuing to move this conversation forward.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you for your work.
Thank you. Hey,
That's Denise.
it's great to see you.
Good to see you too.
Bye, Dr. LaRoche.